I sat motionless behind the wheel, fingers clenched so tightly around it that my knuckles turned pale. The engine idled softly beneath me, casting a quiet hum into the stillness, and the headlights stretched far into the dim, empty road ahead. But I couldn't bring myself to move. It was as if my body hadn't quite caught up to the truth my mind had already accepted. I was leaving, and this was no temporary escape. I wasn't coming back. In the rearview mirror, the house stood motionless and dim, its silhouette etched into the darkness. Every creak in its wooden floors, every shadowy nook, the comforting scent of morning coffee, and the way sunlight streamed through its curtains. All of it had become a part of me over the years. That place had been more than a shelter. It had been home, our home. And yet, now all it represented was a stifling weight on my chest. She was likely asleep by now, unaware, drifting peacefully through dreams while I sat outside, about to walk away for good. This would be her last night as my wife, and she didn't even know it. Lorna. Her name reverberated in my thoughts. Once a source of affection, comfort, and love. But now, it felt like something burned into my skin, something I wanted to tear away. Earlier, I had moved through the motions like a ghost, stuffing essentials into a small bag with trembling hands, my mind in a fog. I went over the facts again and again. Text messages, suspicious receipts, all the evidence that had brought me to this point. The betrayal hadn't hit me all at once. It had begun as a whisper of doubt, a faint nudge that something was off. Now, there was no more room for uncertainty. The truth stood in front of me, undeniable in its cruelty. She had been involved with someone else. She had lied with ease, returned home to me after hours with him, and acted as though everything was still as it had always been. I felt a wave of nausea rise inside me. It wasn't just the act itself that crushed me. It was the collapse of trust, the realization that the life I thought we shared had been quietly rewritten behind my back. How often had she looked into my eyes and said she loved me, while carrying a lie on her lips? How many nights had I held her close, believing we were still united, when in truth, she had already chosen someone else? I exhaled, shaky and overwhelmed, wiping a hand across my face. What good would confrontation do now? No argument or accusation could erase the damage. I'd seen others lose themselves in that spiral, demanding confessions they already had, clinging to relationships long past saving. I wasn't going to follow that path. Instead, I chose the one thing she would never expect. I left. No farewell letter. No parting words. Just silence. My hand found the gear shift, and with a deliberate push of the gas pedal, the car rolled forward. With every yard of distance I created, the crushing pressure on my chest began to ease, little by little. I kept my gaze fixed on the road ahead, refusing to glance back. The house faded out of view in the mirror, along with the life I had once believed in. The farther I drove, the more weight seemed to lift off my shoulders. City lights eventually gave way to darkness, and the hum of the open road swallowed the remnants of everything I was leaving behind. And yet, inside, the storm still churned. I had expected a sense of peace, some clarity after making the hardest choice of my life. But instead, my thoughts kept circling back to Lorna and the life I had abandoned. I tried to focus on the stretch of highway before me. The road was long and empty, mirroring the hollowness I felt deep within. It was late, the world around me asleep, but despite the exhaustion from days of emotional turmoil, I remained alert. Adrenaline kept me going, my fingers tapping aimlessly against the wheel as my mind raced to catch up with reality. No matter how often I went over it in my head, the betrayal still didn't feel real. It had started so subtly, I almost brushed it aside. A shift in her tone, a delayed answer to a simple question, the way she started clutching her phone like a lifeline. First, I dismissed it. I chalked it up to stress or routine changes, normal things after years of marriage. But then came the falsehoods. She had never been good at lying, and until now she hadn't needed to be. I believed we had built our relationship on honesty, or so I thought. When her stories began to crumble under their own contradictions, when she could no longer keep her details straight, that's when the doubt took root. Still, I clung to the hope that I was wrong. I wanted to believe her more than anything else. The truth, that the woman I had given my heart to was deceiving me, was too devastating to accept. So I did what most people do when they're in love. I turned a blind eye. I convinced myself she was overwhelmed with work, that I was overthinking everything. But reality doesn't stay buried forever. It happened a week ago. She was in the shower, and for once, her phone was left unattended on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a notification. Just a single message. "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you." That one sentence was all it took to unravel everything. I stood there, frozen, staring at those words. My body went still as if time had paused. I wanted to believe it was a mistake, a misdirected text, anything that could soften the blow. Maybe it hadn't been meant for her eyes, but deep down, I already knew the truth. I unlocked her phone, the passcode still unchanged after all this time. That tiny detail somehow made the whole thing worse. It was as if she truly believed I would never doubt her, never look. But once I opened her messages, my fears weren't just realized. They were confirmed. Dozens of texts stared back at me, stretching across weeks. Some were heartbreakingly tender. Others crossed lines that shouldn't exist in a marriage. Flirty compliments, private jokes, emotional confessions. Things she had never once shared with me. Reading those conversations felt like trespassing into a world that had no space for me. Then, the sound of the shower turning off jolted me back. I barely managed to lock the phone and slip it back into place before she stepped out of the bathroom. A towel wrapped around her, hair dripping, completely unaware. She smiled, that familiar smile, as if everything was fine. But in that short span of 5 minutes, everything I thought I knew about her had shifted. So I kept up the act. I pretended nothing was wrong. Not because I forgave her, but because I needed a moment to breathe, to think. Confronting her right then wouldn't have changed anything. She'd deny it, twist the truth, make me question my own reality. I needed time to gather myself. Over the next few days, I observed her carefully, watching for those tiny signs of deception, listening for the small cracks that might break her facade. And now, here I was, miles away from the mess, driving further with every passing second. I left her behind, long before she realized I was gone. My phone buzzed from the passenger seat. Without even glancing, I had a sinking feeling I knew who it was. Still, I looked. "Lorna, where are you?" My grip tightened on the wheel as I exhaled, slow and sharp. So she had noticed. Maybe she saw the empty space in the closet. Maybe she found the note I almost left, then tore it up at the last second. But it didn't matter anymore. I wasn't responding. I was finished. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe. Like I was finally free. The gas station I pulled into was nearly deserted, its flickering neon sign giving off a cold, pale light over the cracked concrete. I turned off the engine and sat in the silence, listening to the cooling metal of the car tick and creak. My hands still clutched the steering wheel, like I was bracing for a crash that had already happened. The life I had built was already in ruins. I stepped outside into the chill of the night, stretching my legs and taking in the stillness. The place felt like a snapshot from another era. Dust-covered vending machines buzzing beneath worn-out fluorescent lights. A single truck parked in the distance with no driver in sight. The air carried a faint scent of old gasoline and sun-baked asphalt, grounding me in the present, in this strange new reality. The bell above the door chimed as I walked into the convenience store. The clerk, a weathered man probably in his late 50s, barely looked up from his magazine. His face wore the kind of indifference that came from years of watching strangers pass through without ever needing to know their stories. I almost admired him for it. I grabbed a bottle of water and a bag of pretzels, made my way to the counter, and pulled out my phone while he rang up the items. 11 missed calls. All from Lorna. My stomach twisted with a mix of grim satisfaction and dread. She knew now. She was scared. But what did she expect? That I would just go back, pretend nothing happened, let her carry on with her charade? I clenched my jaw and shoved the phone back into my pocket. I wasn't ready to hear her voice. Not yet. "Long night?" the clerk finally asked, his tone rough but not unkind. I hesitated, then let out a dry laugh. You don't even know the half of it. He gave a slow nod, like he understood without needing details, and I was grateful for that. Some wounds didn't need to be opened any further. Outside again, the night felt sharper. A chill crept into my bones, heavy with exhaustion. I leaned against the car and looked up at the sky. Out here, away from the city lights, the stars were faint but visible. The world felt wide and quiet. I tried to remember the last time I had been truly happy. Not just okay, but deeply joyful, that kind of happiness that makes you believe forever is real. Was it a specific moment? Maybe a summer evening, the two of us laughing on the porch? Or the way she used to look at me when I walked through the door? Or maybe that happiness had always been an illusion, a fragile dream I clung to because I wanted it so badly to be true. The phone buzzed again. I ignored it. But then a new message flashed across the screen, one that made my chest tighten. Lorna, please. I need to talk to you. It's not what you think. Not what I think. My breath caught. I had seen it all, the secret rendezvous, the emotional intimacy she gave to someone else. The way she spoke to him like I didn't exist anymore. What exactly was she hoping I misunderstood? I powered off the phone and dropped it onto the passenger seat before slipping back into the car. I wasn't going back. Not tonight. Maybe not ever. As I merged back onto the road, leaving the station behind me, an uneasy weight pressed on my chest. Even though I understood that no answers would alter the truth, part of me still craved them. The farther I drove, the more fatigue settled deep into my limbs, creeping into every muscle like a quiet toxin. Adrenaline had kept me going for hours, but now that it had worn off, my body reminded me of the toll this ordeal had taken. I hadn't slept, barely eaten, just a few pretzels, and hadn't given myself a moment to process everything that had happened. I was constantly on the move, but that movement didn't mean progress. It just meant I was running. The highway stretched ahead endlessly, a dark ribbon winding through the night. My headlights cast a dim glow on the deserted road, and for the first time since I'd left, the question surfaced, where was I actually heading? There was no clear destination. No plan. All I knew was that I couldn't stay in that house. I couldn't breathe under the same roof as Lorna, not after what I'd discovered. But what was I doing then? Would I just keep driving until the tank hit empty? Find some forgotten motel, try to rest for a few hours before everything came crashing down again? I had no answer to give myself. Somewhere between one gas station and the next lonely stretch of highway, the memories began to sneak in, unwelcome and persistent. I remembered meeting Lorna for the first time. Back then, she had this vibrant energy, unpredictable and challenging in a way that inspired me to grow. I'd fallen deeply, believing with everything I had that she was the one I'd build a life with. I saw it all in my head, our first home, children, little traditions we'd create as the years passed. But now, none of that mattered anymore. The only thing that did was how wrong I had been. My grip on the steering wheel tightened as I replayed what I had seen on her phone. The messages weren't just innocent banter or careless mistakes made under the influence. They were deliberate, thoughtful, intimate. That one sentence kept echoing in my head, "You make me feel alive in ways he never has." That was the one that crushed me the most. Knowing she had been with someone else was devastating, but realizing she had compared us weighed me and found me wanting that tore something deeper. What stung the most was how real my feelings had been. I had truly loved her, not in some fleeting, passionate way, but in the kind of steady, daily commitment that grows stronger even during hard times. And she had discarded that love as if it meant absolutely nothing. Out of habit, I checked my phone again, even though I'd promised myself not to. More missed calls. More unread messages. The latest one made my chest tighten. "Lorna, I'm scared. Please answer me." I stared at the screen, my thumb hesitating above the message. What was she afraid of? That I had left? That she might finally have to deal with the consequences? Or was it just another ploy to draw me back in? I had seen it before, the manipulation, the victim act, the way people like her could twist things until you questioned your own judgment. I wasn't falling into that trap again. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and focused on the road. I needed to find a place to sleep, to regroup, to reclaim some sense of stability. But even as I accelerated and watched the city disappear behind me, a heavy feeling settled in my gut. This wasn't over. Not even close. The roadside motel's neon vacancy sign buzzed and flickered like a fading ember. It looked worn down, peeling paint, a cracked parking lot with weeds poking through the concrete, but it was exactly what I needed at that moment. Somewhere to stop. To think. To temporarily forget that everything was falling apart. I parked near the entrance and shut off the engine. For a moment I sat still, surrounded by silence, before stepping out. The night air smelled of wet pavement, and a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the horizon. A storm was brewing. Somehow it felt appropriate. Inside, the motel lobby was dim and quiet. Behind the counter sat a woman who barely lifted her eyes from her phone as I approached. Her expression was unreadable, like she had seen 1,000 versions of me, people who showed up in the dead of night hoping to disappear for a while. "Just one night," I told her, sliding my ID across the counter. She barely looked at it before typing something into her outdated computer. "Cash or card?" she asked. "Cash," I replied. I had made sure to withdraw plenty before I left. I wasn't about to leave a digital trail she could follow. She handed me a key, her nails clicking against the surface. "Room 12. Checkout's at 11. Ice machine's busted." I took the key and gave a nod. As I turned to leave, I could feel her eyes on me, maybe trying to figure out what my story was. I didn't give her anything. The room was exactly what I expected: stale air. The bedspread was covered in an unattractive floral design, and a small television buzzed faintly in the corner, barely functioning. I dropped my bag onto the nearest chair and sank down onto the edge of the bed, letting out a long sigh. Every part of my body felt worn out, yet my mind refused to quiet down. The phone vibrated once more. I didn't need to check to know it was her, Lorna. I had spent so many years being her husband, the man who answered every call, who paused his world whenever she needed support, who had faith in her even when I shouldn't have. And now here I was, alone in a rundown motel room, questioning whether I had ever truly known her. Despite every instinct telling me not to, I picked up the phone, not to answer, just to scroll through the messages. "Please talk to me. I don't understand why you're doing this. Just tell me where you are. Please." My jaw tightened. The nerve she had, trying to flip the narrative. As if I were the one to blame. She had broken my trust, lied repeatedly, offered sweet goodnights while hiding so much behind my back. And now she wanted answers? Like I was the one who needed to explain myself? I dropped the phone and rubbed my face, trying to will myself into sleep. But one message kept repeating in my mind, different from the others. "I'm scared. Scared of being on her own? Of what she might do? Or was there something more, something I hadn't thought about yet?" I shook the thoughts away. I wasn't going to let her get inside my head again. I kicked off my shoes, crawled beneath the covers, and shut my eyes. Still, as the storm outside gathered strength, the sound of raindrops tapping against the window kept me anchored in unease. Rain hit the motel glass in uneven spurts, like impatient fingers tapping from the other side. I turned to my side, trying to ignore the tight, unsettled feeling in my gut. My entire body ached from the long drive, muscles begging for rest, but my brain wouldn't cooperate. I needed sleep, wanted to shut everything out, but every time I drifted, her face returned. Not the Lorna who had betrayed me, but the one I had once cherished. The one who laughed with a scrunch of her nose, who would tug me back into bed on slow Sunday mornings, pressing close and whispering about how we had nowhere to go. Now, I wondered how much of that had been real. Were those lazy mornings genuine, or had the lies already started weaving through those quiet moments too? I opened my eyes and stared at the ceiling, watching the soft, flickering glow of the neon motel sign dance across the walls. I had to let her go. I had walked away. That was the decision I made. But no matter how far I traveled, she lingered in my thoughts. I sat up and dragged my hands across my face. The clock beside the bed read 3:12 in the morning. I had barely slept. The restlessness inside me was suffocating. The phone on the table remained dark, but I knew the truth: it was never really silent. When I lit up the screen, I wasn't surprised. There were over a dozen missed calls. Some were hers. Others came from numbers I didn't recognize. But one message stood out from the rest. "Lorna, if you don't answer, I don't know what I'm going to do." My chest tightened. Still, I convinced myself it was manipulation. Another attempt to draw me back into her world. She wanted me to fall into old patterns, to be the man who always came through. And for years, I had been that man. But not now. Not anymore. I tossed the phone back onto the nightstand and stood up, feeling like the room itself was pressing in on me. Too many unspoken thoughts. Too many memories I didn't want. I slipped on my jacket and stepped outside. The air was damp and cool, the scent of fresh rain rising from the pavement. The parking lot stretched out under dim streetlights, mostly empty except for a couple of aging pickup trucks and my own car. Everything felt unnervingly still, the kind of stillness that made your instincts buzz with caution. I walked toward my car, not entirely sure what I was looking for. Maybe I just needed to move to remind myself that I still had control over something. But as I reached it, my steps slowed. Something was there, something that hadn't been before. A single envelope tucked neatly beneath the windshield wiper. My stomach dropped. I stared at it, heart pounding. It hadn't been there when I checked in. The rain had soaked its edges, but the main part of the paper remained relatively dry, which meant it hadn't been sitting there long. Slowly, I pulled it out, feeling a growing unease. My name was written across the front in handwriting I knew too well. Lorna's. My breath caught. How had she found me? Had she followed me all this way? Or had someone told her where I was? A chill crept over me as I turned the envelope over and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, the ink blurred in places from the rain, but the message stood out clearly. You don't understand everything. Please talk to me before it's too late. Too late? A wave of nausea twisted my gut. I glanced around the parking lot again, suddenly aware of how exposed I was. Had she been here moments ago? Was she still nearby, hidden in the shadows? Or worse, was someone else watching me? I crushed the letter in my hand and stuffed it deep into my jacket pocket. I should have been furious, burning with rage. Instead of the clarity I expected, a wave of uneasiness washed over me. For the first time since my departure, a troubling thought took root. Had I overlooked something vital? The idea unsettled me deeply. The highway stretched endlessly in front of me, yet my mind felt more chaotic than the winding road. The rain had softened into a light mist, its gentle rhythm on the windshield nearly lulling me into a trance. I kept my hands tightly clenched on the steering wheel, trying to shake the growing tension that had lingered since I found that note on my car. Lorna had always been unpredictable, impulsive, and hard to read. But I never imagined her as someone who would cross certain lines. The fact that she had found me so quickly left me unsettled. Whether it was out of sheer determination or raw desperation, the message was clear: she wasn't ready to let go. I glanced at my phone once more. Several missed calls. Another message from Ben: call me. You need to hear this. A part of me wanted to delete it and move on. I had already made my exit, closed that chapter. But there was something in his urgency that made me hesitate. With a resigned sigh, I pulled into a quiet rest area, parking beneath the soft glow of a street lamp. I finally pressed dial. Ben picked up on the first ring. Orson. Yeah, I said, rubbing my forehead. What's going on? There was a pause, a small silence that made my stomach tighten. Lorna's gone. I gripped the phone tighter. Gone? She left town, he explained. Vanished in the middle of the night. No one has a clue where she went. Relief washed over me, but so did confusion. I had expected her to keep chasing me, to refuse to let go. But this was unexpected. She didn't say anything to you? I asked. Ben hesitated. Not directly. But she told Mom she needed a new beginning. Said she had to sort things out on her own. I exhaled slowly and sank back into the seat. Maybe she had finally come to terms with everything. Maybe, just like I had, she chose to disappear and start anew. Look, Ben added, his tone gentler now, I don't know what went down between you two, and I'm not trying to pry. But if she's gone, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe now you can finally move forward. Move forward. The phrase felt foreign in my mind, like a language I hadn't yet learned to speak. But as I sat there, the gentle patter of rain on the windshield filling the silence, it hit me: I already had. The morning sun began its quiet ascent, spilling soft hues of pink and orange across the sky. I had driven through the night until weariness forced me to stop. I found myself in a small, quiet town that felt untouched by time. It wasn't familiar, and that was exactly what I needed. I wasn't searching for memories, I was searching for something new. I checked into a modest roadside inn, the kind where the clerk barely glanced up from his paper as he handed me the key. The room was plain but tidy, the type of place where no one asked any questions. That suited me perfectly. For the first time in what felt like forever, I turned off my phone. No notifications. No missed calls. Just a quiet, welcome stillness. I stood by the window, watching as the town slowly stirred. Storefronts opened one by one, a few early birds walked their dogs, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee floated through the air. The peace of it all wrapped around me like a blanket. And for the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely at peace too. Lorna belonged to the past now. Whatever she was escaping, whatever motivated her to leave, it was no longer something I needed to carry. She had made her decisions, just as I had made mine. The anger was gone. The resentment had faded. I was no longer bound by any of it. I was free. I grabbed my jacket, stepped out into the crisp morning air, and took a deep breath. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't have a clear direction. But for the first time in a long time, I felt ready to find out.